Today's guest is Manoj Kewalramani, who's famous for his book Smokeless War, that tells the tale of China's politics and diplomacy through the pandemic. He is the chairman of the Indo-Pacific Research Program at the Takshashila Institution and heads their China studies work. Before Takshashila, he's had a long and illustrious career in both journalism and media. In the dozens of times that I've spoken to or listened to Manoj, one thing has always stood out. He's a nuanced thinker who shies away from too many absolutes. So, when I ran the concept of the podcast by him, he took nearly 2 weeks to come back to me with an idea that he felt he believed in deeply. This idea was that the freedom of artistic expression must be absolute.
Hi Manoj, welcome. And this is take number 2.
Hey, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So we had a false start and I'd actually prepared a question for Manoj that I thought would throw him off at the outset, because in attempting to think through this idea, the first challenge was, what does the word art mean? And I suspected that he would expect the question, what is art? And what I'd prepared for him was, Manoj, what is not art? Yeah. Now, I've already heard one version of the answer, but maybe this is attempt to get the same thing straight. But Manoj, what do you think is not art?
I think as I tried to muddle through the first round of my answer, I've actually come to myself realizing that at least at the heart of what I wanted to express in terms of what is not art, I would say reality is not art. Now, you can tell me that reality is how we create it. There's nothing objectively out there. And therefore, your reality can be art. But I mean, I could rather pick on certain aspects and say things that are not art. So the law, like I said, is not art. The law is something concrete. It's absolute. It's based in how we construct society. It's not necessarily artistic. And why is that? Because something artistic is when you distill reality through your own sort of individual cognitive lens, and you move away from the mundane to try and create something that is unique, something that is in some ways very personal, although it may have broader resonance. And in something in which you're sort of, again, I study China, and there's a popular Chinese phrase in Chinese politics, which is seeking truth from facts. So I think art is essentially seeking truth from facts. So what is not art is largely facts, is reality. It's mundane. It's the mundanity of daily life. What is art is when you step away from that to seek something beyond that, an expression that is not necessarily, that may be based in reality, but is perhaps seeking truth.
Got it. Many things to ask here, and I think that this early bit is just going to attempt to flesh out what all of this means before we dive into how to dissect it. There are three people I can see in the process of thinking through what art is: the artist, the perceiver, who may or may not be the artist. It's possible that you create art and only you perceive it. And then some sort of an arbiter who decides whether something is or isn't art. And an example I can give you is, and I'm wondering if this is still the same point you're making. Pi has an infinite number of digits. If I were to write down the first million digits of pi, let's say on a large canvas, were to frame it and put it up in a gallery, I'm assuming people would walk up to that painting and say, wow, this is art. It is the depiction of something that is real. Pi is an objective scientific fact, but still perceived as art. And another way to look at the same thing would be, you mentioned law. In my discovery of capitalism, I discovered shares. And I can think of a share certificate, just that on the wall of a museum, for perhaps, or in my own house, as a piece of art that we've, with our own brains, been able to concoct something intersubjective like a share certificate. Yeah. And there's something artistic about it. So the object itself is not art. Yeah. It is the interpretation that rests in my mind that makes it so.
I think both of them would constitute aspects of art. The object in itself, along with the feeling that it generates, right? And look, the feeling that it evokes might be very different for different people. For some, the same product, if I was a hardcore communist, that share certificate might evoke deep revulsion. Right? But if I was, like you said, I'm Sindhi, so I'm probably a deep capitalist. So that generates a lot of joy, but not necessarily in an artistic way, more in terms of a commercial sense. I think that at the end of the day, to me, art is essentially about the artist. it is not really about the receiver, and neither is it about the arbiter. The arbiter is a product of commercialization. The receiver doesn't really matter. To an artist, it doesn't really matter, right? Who views, in terms of the expression that I'm trying to create, whether it's a poem, whether it's a work of, whether it's a painting, whether it's sketching, whether it's a song, whether it's a movie, unless I'm in the business of generating a livelihood from that, yes, then the receiver matters to a certain degree. But inherently, the receiver does not matter. It is about me expressing myself in terms of how I perceive the world around me and my imagination of the world around me, either the world the way it is or the way I wish the world ought to be. And in that sort of sense, right? So to that extent, I don't think the receiver matters. And even the feeling that is generated amongst the receiver does not really matter to me, because I might have intended revulsion.
Right.
But for you, it created joy. So I don't think it matters as much. So to me, art is personal. It's about that individual and that person's expression.
And I can think of ways to push back on this. So the first and the most obvious way is something like abstract art, right? Where it's, a white canvas with a red streak, and that goes up on a museum wall. So we're just talking about paintings as an example. And it's not, and we of course can't force the artist to explain why they painted something. In fact, we've had artists who've painted something, erased it, and then put that up on a museum wall. Another way to look at the same problem would be, let's say a painting washed up on your shore, and you were to pick it up and you don't know who the artist is and you don't know what the intention behind the art is. And that's most art today, because we find it from the ancient times, and now we view that as art. In the absence of knowing, well, we can assume that a human created it, but in the absence of knowing that a human did create it, now that working under that assumption, and then the absence of knowing what the intent behind that creation was, it doesn't cease to be art. And I think all the interpretation of why that art is beautiful or what it means comes out of the mind of the viewer. Is that not?
So I completely disagree, right? I mean, I don't think the view, like I'm saying, to me the viewer is immaterial. I have a 7-year-old child at home. He makes dinosaur drawings, right? And he loves dinosaurs, so he makes a lot of dinosaur drawings. Every other thing in his drawing book is dinosaurs. I look at it. I'm his parent, so I'm bound to really appreciate it. But I can see somebody else looking at that and going, "Hey, look, my 5-year-old does a better job." Right? They actually draw proportionately, whatever. It is immaterial what I think. It is immaterial what that other person thinks. The only thing that matters is what my 7-year-old is thinking when he's drawing it, and whether he is being able to express himself to the fullest extent that he wants to. To that extent, that is art, right? When we put the receiver or the viewer in place, we are talking about valuation of art. Whether it is valued commercially, whether it is valued societally, whether it's valued individually. And that can depend on many, many factors, right? What may be abstract art, like you said, somebody scribbles some lines and that, becomes this big award-winning thing with millions of dollars being paid for it, and somebody does painstaking, beautiful work and which is sold in Delhi Haat for 500 rupees, but it's adorned some lovely London manor of somebody, right? So I don't think the valuation is distinct from the art, and the valuation is a product of many, many factors. So therefore, to me, art is fundamentally about that individual, whether it is appreciated, whether it is not appreciated, whether it is good by any metric I may have, or whether it is not good by any metric I may have. It is about that individual expressing himself, and whether that individual has been able to me, if I was to sort of remove the viewer and find a metric for valuing art, it would be whether that artist has been able to fully communicate to his or her satisfaction what they wanted to communicate. If they've been able to do that, it's high value art, because it's high value to that person. I used to write rudimentary poetry. It wasn't great, but at least I married the person that I wanted to marry through that poetry, so there was tremendous value in it. But to me, the point at which I could communicate exactly what I wanted to communicate, and I felt that was great. Now, some years later, I felt it not necessarily, right? So my perceptions also changed of what I had done. But to me, that I think is what the valuation of art in that sense would be. Now, commercially and all I get, right? It's different. But that's how I would define it. Therefore, I would say the viewer is completely immaterial to it.
Got it. Understood. So, if I can speak back to you, the approximate definition you're laying out, you're saying that art is something that someone does or creates that they consider art.
Essentially.
Yeah, as long as it's not a fact.
As long as it's not a fact necessarily, it's an interpretation of, is their interpretation of their reality in their pursuit of communicating a certain higher truth. Beyond the fact, right? So, I'll give you an example. We all know, well, technically the sun doesn't rise because the earth rotates and the earth revolves. But okay, let's say the sun rises. Okay. What those first rays of the sun, the first light, what that makes me feel is art. The fact that the sun is there is not art. And the fact that me drawing the sun there is not necessarily art. But if somebody's drawn the sun there and that evokes a certain sentiment in me, that evokes a certain higher belief in me, that evokes a certain sense of, that evokes a certain emotion, whether it's a sense of awe, whether it's a sense of energy, whether it's a sense of beauty, whether it's a sense of any of these things. To me, that interaction then it becomes art, right? So when I wake up in the morning, usually if I wake up at 5:45 and if I'm out in the morning just when the sun is rising, I will stand and I will look at it with a certain degree of awe because it feels wonderful, right? And that's particularly after having lived a life of mostly stayed up most nights and sleeping through most of the days. So suddenly then when I see the sunrise, it feels really beautiful. And there's a certain, those are the moments where I will sit and think about, how special this planet is and all that is. And so to me, that is sort of, to use a better, for the lack of a better phrase, that is God's art. Although I'm as close to his atheist as possible, but that is God's art. But otherwise, it's just normal fact. So it's also in the interpretation of reality that I'm personally sort of processing and coming out with.
Right. And I think this is a good segue to thing number 2 that I wanted to dive into, which is traditionally when we talk about free expression has pertained to that collection of processes by which we flesh out fact. If you want to hold truth to power, you think the state is tyrannical, an idea is poor, scientific ideas are incorrect, that the earth is round, the sun does not rise. Then the way I would do that is I would speak that truth and I would try and communicate it through the language of math or physics or political thought, whatever it is. And the reason we would want people to speak freely is so that we arrive at truth. In attempting to defend why artistic freedom should be absolute, there seems to be a leap in what the word expression means. We've ceased to think of expression as words that lead us to truth, and instead we think of expression as things that we can do or create that allow us to, in some way, feel fulfilled about the interpretation of fact that we have within us. Now, and I'm trying to figure out whether that's a reasonable leap to make at all. Because one clearly, they move in opposite directions, right? One further towards fact and the other towards the interpretation of fact, not fact itself.
Yeah. Look, I think all art sort of is, all art is a type of expression, right? So to that extent, yes, it falls within that broad category. Whether, if I get the question that you were asking correctly, whether it must be protected as a type of expression, is that exactly what you're trying to ask me, right?
Sure, yeah, but also I would think that the reason we want to protect speech is different than the reason we would want to protect art. It sounds like that to me.
Okay. So look, I mean, so to sort of distill, and I was trying to clear this in my head in the last week also. All art is speech, right? And it is expression. So in that sense, it gets covered under freedom of expression, freedom of speech, right? So it's a subset in some ways, right? Art speech, if you will. So to that extent, yes, it should get protected as far as freedom of speech is protected. Right. However, freedom of speech and freedom of expression can be far broader than just art, right? There are different kinds of speech, right? There is political speech, there is religious speech, there is, there may be hate speech. There's different kind of speech. And I think that each of those can't necessarily be classified under art and art speech. Art speech would, again, have a certain aspect of a creative expression of reality, which may not necessarily be fact, right? So to give you the distinction, if I was to be writing a book which is loosely based on my main character, my protagonist is loosely based on, say, Mahatma Gandhi, a figure like that, without actually factually representing him and the events or whatever, or claiming that I am factually representing him, I have much more latitude to do what I want to do, right? And I should have much more latitude to do what I want to do. But the moment I'm claiming that what I'm saying is a factual representation of history, my latitude shrinks, and it should shrink. So to that extent, I think freedom of speech should have limitations. Likewise...
And when you say should shrink,
yeah,
that shrinkage and the adherence to shrinkage is mandated by?
It should be mandated by law, and it should be mandated by the fact that I'm impinging on another person's right. Another individual's right to his own personality, to his own history, and I'm making a claim about fact, which is very different than what I'm doing in that fiction work, which may be loosely based on him. So to the extent that I can clarify that this is a work of fiction, or this is my interpretation, fictitious interpretation of reality, I should be free. But the moment I am sort of making claims on fact is when I think there should be restrictions on what my speech can be, because I'm impinging on somebody else's right of his own reality, and I'm making claims about factual information, so I'm engaging in disinformation and so on and so forth. Whereas as far as I'm being very clear, it's the same distinction between somebody presenting the news on a daily basis in the night and Jon Stewart doing the Daily Show. Jon Stewart has far more leeway, and he should have far more leeway, because if you go to Jon Stewart for news, then there is something terribly wrong in terms of your news coverage and your news consumption and your news ecosystem, which is unfortunately the way the world is today. So I think that distinction is what I would firstly apply to this. I would say that art in general, which again I say is creative, abstract, and is not necessarily factual reality, should have the leeway to explore, because it is through those where we might find deeper truths about the human condition, human existence, and things like that, as opposed to necessarily the truth about a person and his life, and what he ate, and what he did, and how he died, and what he said, because those are claims of fact which need grounding to be verification. But claims of truth, such as a brave man can stand up to a kingdom, or a brave human being can stand up to a kingdom. That's a deeper truth that we're trying to derive, right? That a principle of non-violence can achieve what, say, lots of violence could not. That's a deeper truth that we are trying to derive. To that extent, I think art works. Now, one can say that, where is the line between these? And I agree, there will be fuzziness, and that's where essentially the courts will come in, because whether you're impinging on factual reality and distorting factual reality, and I think yes, that fuzziness will exist, and one has to accept that. But as far as you are clear that I'm not making a statement of fact, it should be fine.
This is interesting, and I think that here is probably one of the fault lines. There is an arbiter here. Somebody has to determine what fact means. That and I know you're using the word truth in terms of like a value truths.
Yeah.
But somebody has to step in and say that this fact is true.
Yeah.
And the example you gave is reasonable. I think the story of Gandhi, has so many contradictory stories embedded within his time frame. As you were speaking, I recently read Midnight's Children, and Rushdie does the job of taking the protagonist through India and Pakistan. And interweaving that fictional tale with many factual things that took place through that story.
Yeah.
Rushdie's books have been banned for various reasons. Not this one and not for this reason, but to what degree would it have been necessary for him to misinterpret, let's say, the emergency under Indira Gandhi, for it to necessitate a ban on the book, or is there any circumstance at all? Is it simply enough that some part of his book is fictional, such that he could then paint other factual events in an untruthful
to me, till
way?
he himself claims that this is a work of fiction, It makes no difference whether the book has 70% fact or 30% fact or 5% fact or none of it. If he is making a claim about a person, a real living person. So if he's making a claim about Indira Gandhi and saying that Indira Gandhi did this and then saying I'm talking fiction, that's a problem, right? Because he's talking about a real person. But if he's making a claim, if he changes the name, again, all of that is, until he's giving enough space so that distancing his creation from the real person, even if it is just a change of name. I have no problem if he keeps her hairstyle the same, her clothing the same, her family heritage the same, whatever. But unless he's not making a claim about a person, real person, it's fine. You can adapt that person, at least from my lens. It's perfectly fine. And it should be fine, Even if it is slanderous, it should be fine. Until he's not really making a claim about that person. Now, if you want to read that and read Indira Gandhi into it, your wish. I mean, there was a movie that came some time back called Rajniti, right? And I haven't seen the movie, but my understanding was that it was supposed to be built around Sonia Gandhi, Katrina Kaif playing Sonia Gandhi. I mean, obviously Sonia Gandhi's life is very different from what Katrina Kaif's life was in that movie. You could draw some parallels and say whatever. But till the creator makes that distinction, where yes, you might draw some parallels, that's fine. But at the end of the day, this is a different character, it's a distinct character, and it's a work of fiction. It's fine. The creator should be free to do whatever they want to do. Banning it is completely a no-no from my point of view.
So if the same movie were to have been claimed a documentary, in your mind,
completely different. Then it's a completely different treatment to it, right? I'm making a claim of fact. Now, whether what I'm saying is fact or not, again, I would prefer not banning it. I would prefer an alternate historian coming and making a documentary and making the case that, this is not the case. But in case I'm engaging in certain actions while making that product, which slander or libelous or any of those things, yes, the person in connection can take legal action because, yes, his rights have been, his or her rights have been infringed upon, and they should be able to make that case. And whether then the arbiter, which is the courts in India, decide that, yes, I don't even then see the reason for a ban. Again, yes, you must pay. And the fact that you're making that payment should be publicly acknowledged by you, maybe at the beginning of your product. So every time you play the movie, there should be a flash which says that, for these reasons, we had sort of had to pay so much amount, whatever, and acknowledge that this is false. Fair enough. Continue to run the movie. It ruins your credibility. So better than a ban is countering the argument. And yes, in some cases you will need to take legal action. That's fine.
And the discomfort I feel potentially around this is that they who decide what true means is the state. What fact means. I don't use the word true. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, yes, to a certain degree, yes, it will have to be, the state will have to have a role to play. The state need not. If a person can make the case that this is slander against me, a certain thing is slander against me, it is upon the person who has made the documentary to actually prove what their factual basis was to make the documentary. So I think the state's job there is not to say what is fact or not fact. The state's job is to say whether the person who's defending what he's saying is fact has sufficient evidence to make that claim. That's where the state's role would come in. And whether failing that evidence, yes, you have broken the law by slandering this person and therefore you owe them compensation or whatever.
What would happen if we did the opposite, which is we said everything is art? Whatever you were to create, if it were a book, as long as you think that it is art, it is art. In fact, I would go in this example, I would go a step further and say, what if we were to say that it does not even need for the creator to acknowledge that it is art? As a perceiver, if I were to see something and say, wow, that is a piece of art, then it is a piece of art for me. And the factual nature of the art is not relevant, and that it is libelous or slanderous or any of those things are not relevant. If we were to go that far and say that anything is art, perceiver is all that matters, intent of artist is not relevant, and the state cannot step in to sort of arbiter. Why would that be a worse way to go about this?
So, I mean, it sounds great, but the challenge there is that you can't live in society with that. right? Society will need to have certain shared understandings of realities. If we don't have shared understanding of realities, we end up in a situation where, say, the United States is right now, where people don't agree on basic facts, right? And that is problematic for social cohesion. So you will need to have certain shared understandings of realities, and distill that from art. If everything becomes art, and therefore my rights as an individual can be easily slandered and so on and so forth, or whether my property rights can be easily violated, then you end up having social breakdown. So for society to function, you will need to at least have certain shared understandings about reality, certain shared protections of rights, and the state will need to guarantee that for social cohesion to function. Now, I know that the argument can be extended further to saying, well, if social cohesion is your goal, then why should art not be? So I get that argument, but you will have. I'm trying to draw, again, to use a politically popular term in India, at least before you had a single party government, common minimum program of shared understandings of reality. And this would be sort of my common minimum program, which allows for humanity to continue to explore, to continue to create, to continue to investigate ourselves, but at the same time try to protect each other so that we can maintain social cohesion and we can maintain a shared understanding of reality. I mean, the fact that today we are living in a world where a significant percentage of people don't believe that the earth is warming up or climate is changing, forget warming up, climate is changing, is challenging, right? We need to have that shared sense of reality. And for that, I think that distinction is important.
I think one way to segue from here to what I think is sort of slightly deeper in this whole topic around just a hierarchy of rights and hierarchy of values is to ask a question like, why is your right to not get slandered superior to my right to make art that is slanderous?
I think, let me resort to the most famous legal argument that I can remember. Your right to move your fist ends where my nose begins, right? That's as much of the law as I know. So I think that's the principle, right? That at the end of the day, you are free to do whatever until it starts to impinge on somebody else. So individual freedom will therefore have that limit. The question is, what sort of impingement, right? To me, the definition of that impingement has to be very liberal, has to be very loose, and has to demonstrate tangible loss and damage. The reason that I'm saying it has to demonstrate tangible loss and damage, such as loss of reputation which leads to commercial loss, financial loss of reputation which leads to social loss, intangible ways. So, I was going to get married and now I'm not going to get married, or things like that. So some tangible demonstration of loss is extremely important. Otherwise, we end up in a situation where we live in a world of hurt sentiments, which is deeply problematic. And we're living currently in that sort of a world of hurt sentiments. And I don't think that is something that is valuable. So yes, I would say that I would be very happy for your fist to move as far as even a millimeter away from my nose, but it should not touch my nose, right? It reminded me of an episode of Friends where Chandler kept waving his hand in front of Joey and saying, "Not touching, can't get married." So it's sort of like that, It's fine even if you're annoying me with that, I should be able to tolerate it, as much as I might not like it. Now I can withdraw, I can leave the chair, but I think that latitude should be, there has to be greater, the burden of me proving that tangible loss has to be greater than just saying it hurt my feelings.
Yeah, which is a negotiation. It sounds,
it has to be.
Yeah, and a few things I wanted to dig in here, which were examples. I can think about, or I have to ask the question actually, the sovereignty of a state. Is that reasonable grounds to infringe on artistic freedom? To say that your art, whatever that may be, in our interpretation of art, is simply dangerous to state sovereignty. And an example here, and I'm happy to link it in the show notes, is an artist who poked a hole in a paint can and walked the length of the Palestinian-Israel border with the green paint following him. And this is a retaliation of some sort of the red line, so a green line of his artistic interpretation. this is performance art, so it's not even it's being created on public property at the juncture of a potential war zone, right, or a place of conflict. For various reasons, both states may step in and say, we do not want this to take place at this particular. Is that reasonable? Is that infringement fine, that you can't poke a hole in a paint can and walk the length of the border just because you want to?
So if you're vandalizing public property, I think that is a problem. But beyond that, I don't think sovereignty is a strong enough case to restrict artistic expression. Now, the state may want to stop him because the state feels that it may lead to other consequences such as incitement and so on and so forth. But again, that's a terribly slippery slope. And to me, it's fine. He knows he's walking. If somebody shoots him, he knows it's a war zone. He's taking that risk. It's the state's job to protect him as much as they can, as far as they can. But there are obviously going to be circumstances which are beyond the state's control, particularly when it's a war zone. So if you understand the risks and you still make that choice that I will go and express myself in this way, it's fine. The most mundane thing that I can think that they can actually do, and which I think I will agree with, is that vandalizing public property, and you can pick him up for that. Beyond that, I don't think sovereignty is a strong enough case, because it's such a slippery slope that you may end up in a case where, somebody unfurling a certain kind of flag is a violation of sovereignty. Somebody, reading a poem is a violation of sovereignty or a threat to national security. So to me, again, I understand that these have to be negotiations. I understand that, and again, there's a difference between art and, say, propaganda material, which is about making weapons or about inciting revolution, and even there, I mean, to me, poems which talk about revolution, fine. I don't see the issue with it. Unless it is leading to an organization which is then challenging the state, where I agree the state needs to act. It's okay.
But with the example of the propaganda pamphlets, an artist could say something like, let's say the word at the top of the pamphlet says revolution, but the artist says that it does not say revolution. It's just a random collection of paint strokes that reads that way.
I'm saying even if it's a propaganda pamphlet which says revolution, again, so here I might draw the distinction between political speech and art speech, right? And that's a fine distinction. So if it falls under political speech, where I'm inciting violence, where I'm inciting certain action, and that action leads to organization, to me, that organization bit is really, really critical, right? Without that, I don't think action is necessarily warranted. But then again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know currently where the law is based. But I would assume that I would be okay with ideas, because when you're in the marketplace of ideas, you should push back with the marketplace of ideas, with other ideas, right? But that's political speech to me. That's not necessarily art. If it's a poem, this is where political speech and art speech can sort of mingle, right? If it's a poem about revolution and about that beautiful day when we see utopia, John Lennon's Imagine, right? One could say that's a revolutionary song in some ways, right? I don't think we should clamp down. I think it's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. And the state should be, when that mobilizes to organization, is when the state should step in.
Even if all of them are artists?
Yeah. Yes.
And the analogy I'm trying to draw is, you said it should actually be fine for one artist to have to be able to come to a border and draw the green line, as long as he's cognizant that he could end up being maimed in the process. And let's say a state were understanding of this, then they would allow dozens of artists to turn up, all to conduct art. How do you differentiate that from an organization?
At the end of the day, it's about whether you define what that artist is doing is art, or whether you define it as political action, as political resistance. Now, art can be resistance also, of course, but whether that is about upending the state's writ. If that action, rather than speech, is about upending the state's writ, I think the state will have to act. because the state's objectives will be, first, the primary objective of any state is survival. And then, of course, as part of that is you have to be ensuring security of citizens within. So to that extent, I can see the reason, and there's a range of actions you can take, right? You can deny permission, you can block, you can do many, many things before you actually detain and prosecute. And I think detention and prosecution is when that art speech has transmorphed into political speech and political action. Until that has happened, I think it's okay. I understand where states might want to say, sorry, but we're denying permission to do it here. Go in your room, go in your home, go in your private space, paint. We don't care.
Then there seem to be at least two conditions where the freedom of artistic expression is not absolute. The first, where it infringes on somebody else's property, their own body, their house, all of those things. And two, where the state deems that there is reasonable, whatever that means, grounds for this being an infringement of sovereignty to the state itself.
Yeah, and again, in the first case, like I said, I think the burden of proof should lie in both cases. The burden of proof is not on the artist. The burden on proof is on the state and on that individual whose rights are being infringed upon. And the burden of proof must be heavy. And it must be tangible and demonstrable. It cannot be a feeling. It cannot be an instinct. It has to be more. It has to be tangible demonstration. Even if there are 5 artists with that paint can and the state clamps down on them, and those artists take you to court. To me, the legal system should be robust enough to push back against the state and say, why did you deny them their rights if this is what they're all doing? And if the state can make the case that it is public property and we didn't want defacement of public property, I think that's fine. But if the state makes the case that because we are worried that 5, today it'll be 5, tomorrow it'll be 7, then it'll be 20, then it'll be 50, and then how will we maintain security? To me, that's not a legitimate answer. To me, the legitimate answer would then be, can you show us where mobilization is happening and where mobilization is actually challenging sovereignty? So I think that the burden of proof has to be heavy.
The defacement of public property, I understand.
Yeah.
What if the art does not include defacement? So, for example, if I were to dance on the street, I deface nothing at all. I'm allowed to walk on the street. Now, suddenly we're in this place where somebody has to decide whether what I'm doing is dancing or walking. And then say that if enough people turn up here and start dancing, we're not okay with it because please dance in the privacy of your own home, don't dance here. And if enough people are walking, that's perfectly fine because the road is for walking.
At the end of the day, it's public space.
Yeah.
And in that public space, the state has the right to deem what actions can constitute threats to others. So in the interest of the rights of protection of the rights of others, it is fair for the state to take that action and say, sorry, you will not dance here. We will give you an alternative place to go and dance. Go to Jantar Mantar and dance.
Even if as the artist I say I'm not dancing.
Even if you want to walk, this is not a place where I want you to walk right now because it is unsafe. We deem it as unsafe for XYZ reasons. Please go to Jantar Mantar and walk. We are not, your action of walking is something that we are not preventing. Please do that, but please do that there. Now, of course, can states abuse this? Yes, of course. Farmers want to come into Delhi. They say, no, not into Delhi. You can go and protest in Punjab. Yeah. But no, I need to protest outside Parliament. So, but again, that moves away from art to political speech. And therefore, it has a different set of rules.
Yeah, so but what I'm pushing back on is the claim that it's sufficient for the artist to say it is art. I think that we've approximately, it feels like somebody else, an arbiter, should also be able to agree that it really is art. Otherwise, anything could escape under the guise of this is just artistic expression.
Yeah, but artistic expression is, it missed it. I mean, the state does not need to decide whether it is artistic expression or not. The state is not contesting in that example that it is artistic expression. The state is saying this zone is closed off to anything. Right?
Oh, including walking.
Including walking. So if you want to go and do your expression of artistic walking, please go and do it over there. It's perfectly fine. So the state is not taking a call there on whether that walk that you're performing is art. What it's saying is that in this area, it is not permitted. And that is a public space, so it is the state's right.
Right. But you would be opposed then to something like the state saying people can walk here, but they can't dance here. Because we think that dancing prevents other people from freely walking. It's just...
Yeah. If it's a public space, yes.
Which means then the state has to decide what dancing is. Which of these people here moving constitute dancing and which don't?
Yeah. Yes, it would be, as absurd as that is, yes, that would be the case. The state would have to decide what kinds of actions it would do. And that would be an arbitrary decision of the constable standing over there deciding what is dancing and what is not, right? He might find Hrithik Roshan to be artistic, he will not find me artistic at all, right? So he might actually stop me. So it depends on, so I mean, that person will have to make that decision. But this is in the context of, not necessarily, I mean, at the end of the day, as you know, as we enter as people, as we enter a social contract, we give up some rights, right? I would make the distinction between public space and private space. So within public space, and again, the reason why the state says you don't do this here is because it potentially infringes on the rights of others. And again, like I said, the burden of demonstrating that it is infringing on the rights of others should lie on the state and should be heavy. It can't be light. But yes, the state will have the right to say whether it permits certain kinds of activity or not.
Yep. I hear how you're coming at this, and I'm on purpose picking these sort of more annoying examples, especially
I can see that.
in public one, because I know that the common counter to I don't want to see my prophet painted, or I don't want to see my goddess painted naked, right? Any of these things. The common counter is, then don't look at it. Right?
I agree.
I don't want to see the movie Animal, then don't watch it.
I agree.
And so I'm just trying to concoct those situations where it's not even a piece of art that you can display.
Yeah.
You yourself are the art, it's performance art. In those cases, is it fine for the state to step in and say it's happening in a public
So
space?
look, I think, so this is the challenging thing, right? Does the artist have the right to paint the goddess naked? Yes. Does the artist have the right to make a portrait of the prophet, which is not permitted in Islam? Yes. To me, they should have that right. I don't think those should violate any laws, but it depends on which country you are and what the law is. But I don't think ideally they should violate any laws. Does your right to demonstrate that in public constitute freedom of art? I don't think so. Does it constitute freedom of speech? Yes. So that is the distinction between freedom of art and freedom of speech in my head. In my head, if I'm at my home and I want to paint that, I should be free to paint it. Yes. But if I am going to make this a case of freedom of speech and say I'm going to express it publicly, will there be hurt sentiments? And if I know society the way it is, will there be hurt sentiments? Will there be people who will have a problem with it? Yes. Should the state protect my speech of depicting that art? I think yes. Should it prioritize my speech over hurt sentiments? Yes. Because to me, freedom of speech is a higher principle. But that is freedom of speech. So, in the beginning when we started, we discussed speech and art.
Yeah.
I think this is a distinction, right? So the freedom of art or art speech in that sense, I would say is this, whereas the expression of it to a wider public and communicating that to a wider public, whether at a gallery or at a street side corner or however, is a different form of freedom of speech, where my art can be highly valued, it can be reviled, but at no point should I be denied that right because it outrages certain social moralities. I don't think that should be the case, and my answer to that would be, don't like it, don't look at it. I think that's how the world should function, but unfortunately that's not how the world functions.
Yeah. Earlier I mentioned two cases approximately. One where individual freedoms, rights, their own body property are threatened, or second, the state itself is in some way threatened. I can think of a third. A third is those that the state is responsible to look after. And children come to mind here. So photography is a form of art, I presume you would agree. Yeah. And taking photos of naked children is a fairly contentious issue.
Yeah.
And, by country law has been all over the place on this. And there's the entire spectrum. It's the photo of a naked child, the drawing of a naked child, the drawing of, the second, the drawing of a particular naked child. So real person, a real child.
Yeah.
The third is a fictional child, right? And the drawing of a fictional child. And then fourth, for all of this, does intent matter?
Yeah.
And in fact, I was talking to somebody recently who has a child, and I was preparing for this conversation, and I brought this up. And he said, you know what, when I was a kid, my son used to roam around naked for a large part of, until he was 6, 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
And that was perfectly fine. I mean, it's natural for a child to be naked. It's how we've evolved for so many years. And unless the intent is depraved in some way, for the large part, nudity should be clearly within the ambit of what art is,
Yeah.
irrespective of age of the
Yeah.
person. But then the counter is that you can have cases where you have a well-intentioned artist taking photos of children just
Yeah.
to show, for example, the beauty of childhood,
Yeah.
and all those moments that are captured. And on the other side, people collecting these photographs
Yeah.
because they have depraved or pedophilic tendencies. How do you approach this? I mean, the state saying that I prevent your artistic expression, irrespective of the intention you have,
Yeah.
simply because in the broader context, I think that this is unacceptable.
So again, I think that two different things, right? At one level is firstly the consent of the parent and the child and so on and so forth to take that picture. Once that is the case and the person takes that picture, then the consent to demonstrate that picture somewhere in a gallery or somewhere else or on your website or wherever, to circulate that picture or put it in print, however. How somebody uses that picture is not something that you have any control over. I mean, okay, I grew up in the Middle East, right? Till I was about 8 or 9 years old. A lot of young Indian men working in the Middle East used to carry Stardust Filmfare magazines from India. They used to request for those from India. When those magazines would come now, sometimes you had a heroine on the front cover. And if you see the Stardust and the Filmfares of that era, used to be far more risky in the covers than they are today. Although I don't even know they exist today anymore, apart from them being online. So you had to, when you took the magazine there, you had to take a black felt pen and you had to blacken out all the skin that was showing on the woman's body.
Oh, really? So, as in when you transport it from here?
Yeah, for the magazine to go and for the Saudi customs to permit that magazine in. But of course, nobody checked the magazine inside, right? So if it is Madhuri Dixit doing Dhak Dhak Karne Laga in that, in that outfit, or Raveena Tandon doing Tip Tip Barsa Pani, I'm dating myself here. But that sort of, would I say, now to those men, that was titillating, that was exciting, that was whatever, right? How do you control for that, right? So I don't think that, now the state may clamp down on distribution of certain kinds. So it's clamping down on the artist's freedom of speech to distribute an expression in that sense. But if the artist is creating art and for the purpose of creating art, and the subject is consenting, I don't see a problem with it. The state does have a legitimate right to clamp down on distribution because that might lead to significant infringement and based on evidence of events that have taken place, of violation of others, because it may create certain outcomes. So I do see the reason where that might happen, particularly when it comes to children. But beyond that, when it comes to adults, I don't think there should be any issue at all, because these are children, because obviously consent is a huge issue and so on and so forth, and because pedophilia is a deeply problematic sort of event. But I think that to that extent I agree. The state does have some right to clamp down on the nature of distribution. But on the creation of that art, if I am in my home and I want a painting of my son, sitting, eating grapes as a 2-year-old, with his butt cheek showing. I want that picture. I've commissioned an artist to make that picture. It's in my house. I don't think the state should have any role to play in that. But when I'm starting to make money out of that, selling it, I think the state might have a response to that. Because it affects wider society than just me and the artist who's created it. So to that extent, again, the difference between speech and expression as opposed to just artistic creation. So I would agree that yes, the state does have a role to play in that, because it's very difficult to, it is trying to make a trade-off between cracking down on a particular crime over the expression of certain art, and it is making it in an extreme case where children are involved who don't necessarily have agency and consent.
So just to draw this distinction out in my head, on one side you have the creation of the art, on the other you have the distribution of the art. Okay, let's say that I were to draw something extremely provocative, right, or shoot something extremely provocative, and nobody in the world knows about it. It's just me. I think already at this point there is no infringement. The state does not know, nobody knows, and I'm simply allowed to do it because the absence of knowledge. Okay. Now, level 2 on this would be if everybody knew that Deepak had painted something extremely provocative, they just had not seen it. In your mind, I'm assuming you would say that's perfectly fine.
That's still perfectly
because you've
fine,
not
yeah.
distributed it, right? The knowledge of its existence, even if it is factual, that knowledge of its existence is not.
Yeah.
The state cannot step in and confiscate
Should
or
not,
anything
yes.
of the sort. Should not, and then third, let's say that I were to, my friend said, hey, I would like to see this as well, and I were to invite my friends home for that viewing. Now, this private transaction of inviting others to my house to show off the art, how do you fall here? Is that okay? Is that fine for me to?
Yes, I would say that's fine. It's still within your private confines. It's what you do within your house. The state should have no role to play in that. Yes.
And if I were to put it from my house to my car, transport it to my friend's house, and then...
That's when I start having a problem with it. Right? Because I presume even then I would be okay with it. It's in your friend's house. It's still in a private space. The moment you put it out for public consumption, the moment you tweet it out, is the moment when the state can potentially have a role to play.
But is it the tweeting of the image, let's say, or the existence of the image?
The tweeting of the image, not the existence of the image. And even there, again, the distinction that I was drawing was particularly to children, because children don't have agency, don't have the ability to consent, and children fundamentally need to be protected.
Yep.
Right? I mean, as a parent, you are in charge of the child's protection, right? Legally also, and that should be the case. When it's an adult, it's very different, because this argument can be used to say, well, then all pornography should be banned. No, an adult has a right to consent. An adult has potentially the capability to protect themselves and a lot of other things, right? They have agency. Children don't. So to that extent, and children also cognitively are not at a point where they can take decisions for themselves, whether it is whom to trust, whom not to trust, and so on and so forth. As an adult, I would expect you to be able to take those decisions. So I would draw that distinction that specifically when it comes to children, that's the case. But about adults, whether you make naked paintings of men, women, transgendered, whatever, it's perfectly fine. And you should have the right to distribute them. I don't think their social morality should be an issue. Or there the argument that, oh my God, because there is more such paintings, there are more rapes happening. I don't think that should be the case. Because at the end of the day, it's the state's job to protect, and adults have to be careful in their own ways. Children don't have that faculty. So that's why I would make the distinction. Rather than that, I would say yes. So for children's paintings and things like that, I would say yes, public distribution would be a problem. But the rest of it, not really.
Got it. I have a follow-on question, but as an aside, in your definition, is porn art or fact?
Good question. Whatever pornography I've watched, I've never found it terribly realistic. So I would say it is art. It is an art to orgasm 10 times without really feeling it. So I would say that it is a kind of art. Look, it is fiction.
In our earlier distinction between, fiction movie and documentary.
Yeah, it is fiction.
It falls closer to fiction.
It is not just closer, it is fiction.
Okay.
It is fiction. Anybody who's ever engaged in intercourse knows that that's not how the real life works. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, so back to my original question. You mentioned consent, and with photography in particular, consent in public spaces is not something we seek. Right? You can take a photo of a crowded street and that's okay. I can still publish it.
Yeah.
I don't have to go around asking everybody for consent who's in that photo. And I think that's just part of the contract that you sign as someone being in public.
I think that because it is impractical to take consent, we don't. Otherwise, I think that we should be taking consent. Because to be fair, I think that I should have the right to say no. Just because I'm in a public space does not mean that I've consented to the right to be photographed by somebody. So I think I should have the right to say no, but it's just that it's impractical. So yes, to me, it's a violation of my right.
Would this apply to journalism?
Yes. Look, as a journalist, if I'm going to cover a certain story, I should ideally take consent, right? If I'm taking pictures of a grieving family, ideally I should take consent. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But you should be taking consent instead of thrusting mics and taking photographs. If you are investigating a certain story, which is drugs, crime, whatever, fair enough, I'm violating that person's right to consent. Yes, and I'm conscious. It's okay. I should be consciously violating that person's right to consent because me covering that story provides a broader social good, right? So to that extent, there's a trade-off. But if I'm just an artistic photographer who's sitting somewhere in public and you're clicking pictures of some people as they are walking by, you should take consent. Now, it might be impractical. Like I said, if you're taking a drone shot over Chandni Chowk, you can't take everybody's,
Yeah.
consent. So I get that, but I think that ideally you should.
Or a photo of the earth.
Yeah, or a photo of the earth.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think the photo of the earth, I think there is enough anonymity if you're taking a photo of the earth. But otherwise, I think that it is, because I might not want to be photographed, right? And I should have the right to say no.
No, I feel this deeply because
Yeah.
I hate being on other people's films and reels.
Exactly.
But I think I've made my peace with the fact that in public spaces, the impracticability of just being unable to take everybody's consent is enough for me to say, you know what, fine, I'm taking the risk as I go out that it's possible I get photographed or videographed. Okay, we will take a quick break here. When we are back, we're going to quiz Manoj on AI and art created by AI and whether the rights that he wants to defend for humans extends to AI as well. Hi Manoj, welcome back after the break.
Hey, thanks so much.
Before we dive into AI art, I had one question that sort of popped to my mind as we were on the break, which still has to do with human beings. This is a slightly weird way to approach it, but I want to give it a shot and see what you think. When you said that your fist ought to end where my nose starts, this to me is the distilling of the harm principle. In fact, in preparing for this, I reread Stuart Mill's On Liberty. And many of his arguments are quite outdated with respect to, let's say, this type of expression. But it holds that if I were to chop off your arm, right, that would constitute a violation of your bodily integrity and would violate the harm principle. If the harm principle means anything, it means that I can't chop off your arm.
Yes.
Right? And one way to define why that is harm is to call it a rearrangement of atoms. Right, like those atoms belong to you, and I have caused their rearrangement without your consent. Okay, we could say that let's say someone were to draw or paint or say something that was religiously offensive. I believe very deeply in my religion and in my God, and I don't actually have to see the piece. To know of its existence is enough for the atoms in my brain to rearrange in such a way that it causes me grief and strife. Why is that not violative of the harm principle?
You shall, if that is violative of the harm principle, then you shall also sue your own dreams. Because unfortunately, we do not have control on our dreams, and sometimes our dreams are vile. And they cause us deep anxiety and deep disgust, because they may end up, sometimes the people we love the most betray us in our dreams. Sometimes, the gods that we trust in the most or believe in the most leave us wanting. So I don't think that in itself is something. I think that when we reduce, as much as I enjoy physics, I think when we reduce human beings to atoms and to particles, we lose the essence of what it means to be human. And I think that is extremely essential for us to be talking about art and the impact of art, right? And the impact of harm and things like that. Because if that is the case, I mean, at the end, do these atoms really belong to me?
Exactly.
So I think that ownership can be also questioned, right? So I think that, yes, I would appreciate it if you don't chop off my arm. If you do, I will definitely seek legal recourse, and I'm sure I will win. But I think that what you think and how you think about something, or your knowledge of the existence of something, cannot be constituted as harm. Because you have the right and the freedom to not think about that thing. And it is about, I do not have the ability to regrow my arm. If I did, then perhaps it was different. But if I can avoid thinking about what you've created, I can ignore it, and I can focus my mind on many other things which lead me to not think about what you've done, right? So I don't think that it falls under the principle of harm, right? Because
I have two ways to push back against this. The first is the traditional philosophical argument against free will. Underlying that core to the argument is the fact that you really cannot predict what you will think next. That thoughts come from nowhere. They sort of emerge from your subconscious. Now you have a stream of thoughts that emerge by themselves. You can pick some of those, not pick some of those, and even the picking of those not really fully within your control. So the fact that you do something that I hear of, and then that consumes my being, is not truly in my control, because I don't really have control over what thoughts I think. Right? That's one way to think about it. And the second is, why should you have the right to put me in a position where I have to build a strong center of gravity, figure out how to, and it's, I think about the IQ distribution curve, right? There are folks who, for example, under the IQ of 80 or 70, who have a really hard time getting a job. It's something like 10% of the population.
But I have not put you in that position. It is you who sought out the information that this has been created. You could have chosen not to read the newspaper. You could have chosen not to watch the television. You could have chosen not to do many other things and stay cloistered inside your home and keep praying to your God.
Which is the counter. The counter is, let's say that, I were to go back home and then my brother were to come up to me and say, Deepak, do you know that, Manoj painted this and it's horrible?
Please do sue your brother.
Right, sue my brother, right? Yeah. I hear you. And so the only way out of this, one route is that the state steps in and says, look, we'll be a benevolent, reasonable character in the middle and decide what you can and cannot publish, what is and isn't reasonable art, right? We'll make that decision so that those folks whose constitution is poor and who are unable to regulate themselves to the degree that you and I are capable of, let's say, are not severely impacted. The protectionist state steps in. The other way is to say that if you have poor constitution, stay at home, don't come out, don't read a newspaper, don't talk about the world. And I'd suspect that all those people who do have poor constitution will say something like, I can't really fix this. It's not of my own volition that I feel so deeply.
Of course you can fix it. I mean, and you can clearly fix it. Just like I have this constant conversation with my kid nowadays. Like most people, he doesn't like being discomforted. So when I push him too hard on something, the moment discomfort hits, he will quit. So I have to tell him that, look, this discomfort is important for you. And part of growing up is realizing which discomfort is useful for growth and which discomfort causes injury. And if you can decipher the difference between those two, you're likely to live a much more contented life, right? Because you're likely to also grow without really hurting yourself. And the only way to identify that is by hurting yourself sometimes. The classic example is being in the gym, right? Some pain is good, it grows muscle. Too much of it can sometimes lead to injury, which can actually retard your development. So it is important for those people with poor constitution it is much more important for them to encounter these ideas so that they can grow beyond the limitations of their constitution. Because to say that is to say that they are inherently limited. And I wouldn't want to believe that about anybody, that there is an inherent limitation.
Even if they say it of themselves?
Yes, of course. Why not? Why would you want to limit yourself within a case and say, this is what my limits are, this is where my limits are? I mean, it's your choice, it's your life. But I would say, as part of freedom of opportunity, and the state's job to create opportunities for all people should be, you have the opportunity to be discomforted so you grow. And the provision of that art, which creates a certain degree of discomfort, is for you to grow. Now, let's take the example of the movie Animal.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm only using that as an example because I had lovely arguments with my wife back home about this. I have not seen the movie. I have no desire to see the movie. But it provoked such a conversation. To that extent, I think it's a very important movie because it provoked such a conversation in this society about what is it that men are going through in this society.
Right.
That this movie has done so well. For what some people find tremendously toxic about that masculinity displayed in that movie. Why is it that the toxic masculinity exists? What is it that is given it such fillip nowadays in this present day and time? What is it about what the guy is doing that is deeply problematic? To me, it seems very obvious what he's doing is problematic, right? But to many, it might not. So what is it that is creating this sense of acceptance for this level of, and is it underlying a certain, I don't think that was the director's intention, but as a conversation, does it underlie a certain sense of crisis within men? I think to that effect, it's quite a useful movie. It started so many interesting conversations. It was a horrible product in itself from my perspective. Again, like I said, I haven't seen the movie, but even the promo that I saw, I was reviled by the promo, and I said, I don't want to see this movie. But if it didn't exist, we would have not had these conversations about some of these things. So to that extent, I think it's okay. So I think the right of the movie to exist is fine. What I drew from it, the pain of watching that 2.5-minute promo, was to end up having these conversations which helped me grow a little bit, thinking about what is it that we are doing that is leading men to think a certain way, or to think that certain actions are acceptable, or certain actions must be done to make a statement of manhood.
Correct.
So to that extent, it was useful.
And I hear you, and I think that I'd approach it the same way. But here there are a few interesting things. I think one, there's no clear creator. And we'll come to AI, which has no creator presumably, but in the case of a movie, it's a large group of people who come together, and then bits and pieces are put together, and then that creation comes to play. And we have not spoken about intent of creator, because you're saying something like the wisdom of the public will glean from this movie the fact that it is
No, I don't believe in the wisdom of the public. I believe in the fact that it has a right to exist. And for the people who are reviled by it and who don't want to experience it, please don't experience it. I did not too. But for the people who want to push back against the arguments made in the movie, great. It gave you that space to make that argument. And for the people who want to learn from why certain underlying social events, social structures are being built, it allows you to explore that. So if you wanted the pain of experiencing that movie is useful till you're using it for growth. But if you're going to use it to come out on the streets and protest, to burn down theaters and block certain things, then you're doing your disservice to yourself. So for the people with the poor constitution, they perhaps will go and burn down theaters, which is stupid. And the state's job to them should be, this is an opportunity provided for you to grow. Please take the opportunity to figure out how to grow from it.
I'm also wondering if, in line with this, so we have a certification board, often instead called a censure board. The C means certification, surprisingly. And part of its constitution comes from early case law. So the K. Abbas case was the question of being able to grade a movie.
Yeah.
Right? Can the state decide who is and who is not allowed to see a movie?
Yeah.
And then Lady Chatterley's Lover, that entire case was about the banning of a book is something so vile that there exists such a category that nobody sits in. So if we were to start at children can view this, and then adolescents can view this, and this has violence. Does there exist such a category where zero human beings fall such that nobody can view them? I know your answer is no.
Yeah.
But I'm presuming you're okay with gradation. You're okay with the state saying, here are the different ratings for a movie.
Yeah, I think that's fine, and I think that's needed. Again, to me, the primary objective there is, it has to be linked, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but it has to be linked to brain development, children, adolescents, and things like that. To that extent, it is linked to that, I think. And it's not a perfect science, right? So, you can say, why is this for 14 and not for 14? Okay, so I grew up in an era where there's lots of professional wrestling on television. Sometimes it was extremely wild, sometimes it was extremely sexual in nature, and it was for PG-14, which was clearly not for 14-year-olds. But and it was PG-14 in the West. It was not in India. It was available freely on Star Sports, so there was no restriction on it. So I think that, yes, there has to be, these are going to be grey areas, but there has to be some gradation where at least you're able to make sure that children get exposed to certain kinds of ideas not too early in their cognitive development.
And here we cannot defer to the judgment of the parents.
I think we can, but I think even for parents, and again, so before I became a parent, I would have said yes, defer to the judgment of the parent. But after becoming a parent, I realized we are quite clueless. So it is quite difficult. And therefore, what I do as a parent is I err on the side of extreme caution. But even then, my kid is now into Justice League and Marvel. He's dealing with, through them, he's dealing with issues of war. So in Justice League, he's dealing with somebody going back to World War II. And he's asking me, why is there a war? Why are there bad people? Why are there good people? He's asking me about, why is it that the Americans were good And these are complex questions, right? And I've had to answer these questions. So he's dealing with, these are quite mature things for a 7-year-old to start thinking about and start asking me about. And they're difficult to answer. So I am quite inclined to, I have not watched Justice League, but now that he's gotten into it, it's very difficult to get him out of it. But that's the idea, right? That as a parent, I myself don't know where lines are. So it's useful if those lines are drawn by the state in partnership with certain experts in psychology, child development, things like that. Yes, it can be helpful. It's a helping hand.
Yeah. And speaking of movies and facts, I can't remember the name of the movie that was about the ISIS and women from Kerala being shipped
Kerala
off.
Story.
Kerala Story, yeah. So I can think of movies like Kerala Story, Kashmir Files, which are similar to my example of like A Midnight's Children, where you have a fictional tale that is interwoven deeply with a factual claim.
Yeah.
And if the artist, or in this case no single artist, but the group of artists, the creators, whatever subset, refuse to say whether it is fact or fiction, they make no claims at all. They have simply produced something, and that thing is now in the public domain. In this case, because let's make the presumption that some of the parts of that plot line were not agreeing with fact.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable for the
I think that
certification?
I think it is important for certification to make the claim that it is a work of fiction.
Okay.
I think that is important. Making that claim is important. Thereafter, it may not accord with fact. It's perfectly fine. But I think that making that claim is very important.
What if the artist were to do something silly, like say that the certification board exists for the purposes of movies? This is not a movie. This is a painting. And I remember actually I used to do spoken word poetry when I was younger, and I met this gentleman who would start off writing a poem. And he was on LSD, of course, and somewhere along the way would convert to a painting. The poem would never finish. Words would flow into color, would flow into whatever high he was on at that moment in time. And I'm not even sure what you'd call that, because you couldn't call it a poem or you couldn't call it a painting. This is the nebulousness of art. Then you would be exempt from certification at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, if it is being shown in a theater, and if you're charging me money for it, if it's available on a DVD and it's moving picture, it's motion picture, whether it's a movie or a TV series or a mini series or whatever, it's a product which requires certification based, I would say that yes.
Yeah.
Likewise, I would say even paintings. There are certain paintings that I don't think children should be exposed to because they might not be able to process it. So, for example, I can't remember, it's in the Sistine Chapel or somewhere where you've got the entire resurrection and hell and everything. Maybe it's in the Sistine Chapel, but I think that children should not necessarily be exposed to
like
that.
Like Dante's Hell, all the layers.
It's complex. It's complex. They will not understand it. And it may not be easy for them to process. So, my kid asks me, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, he asked me about hell. And he asked me whether it's a real place. And I gave him the answer that I could give him about what hell is and what hell isn't. And I think my answer was too philosophical for him. He looked at me and he said, okay, my primary question to then is it okay to tell people to go to hell? And I said, no, you should not tell anybody to go to hell. So I think that it's, and his answer was again that if it's not a real place, why should I tell them not to go to hell? So at the end of the day, it can be complicated, but I think there's certain things, even in painting, even in music, yes, there will be gradations, particularly when it comes to linked to cognitive development of a person, of a child. Once you're an adult, it's a different thing. And again, the definition of whether you are 17 years and 364 days versus 17 years and 54 days and 56 days, whatever. So that distinction, 64 and 65 and 66, yeah, clearly. So I think that distinction, is, it can be arbitrary, yes, but I think it's useful to have that, right? That it gives you markers at which you make sure that you don't expose people to certain ideas or certain imagery or certain views, because it might be complex for them to process it. And as they grow up, yes, at that point of time, it's not that complex or that horrific idea that they must process. What they must process is, how do you deal with something that doesn't agree with you, something that seems reviled, something that you revile, something that you deeply are affectionate about. How do you deal with those emotions? Once you are in that place, as your brain develops, yes, by all means, it's your choice. it's okay to be exposed to that. So to that extent, I think the certification for everything, poetry, music, art, the use of the internet,
which means category,
yes,
right?
is needed.
There is no such thing as a poem that is also a painting.
Yeah.
It will fall into a category by some set of definitions.
You can call it something else, but it needs to have some degree of barometer depending on the nature of the product, right? So nature of what it might how it might impact the child. To that extent, I'm not saying the artist does not have the right to create it. They should still create it, but who gets to see it, I might be able to restrict that depending on what I assess as impact.
Got it. Okay. Now on AI, and maybe a way to get into the AI thought process is to not think about an artificial intelligence of any sort. Let's say that a programmer were to make there's a screen, a collection of pixels, and a random image generator, right? Now the image that this program spits out is not something that the programmer intended. He intended for a random image, but not that particular image. And I was speaking to a lawyer friend in preparation for this, and she was mentioning how it would meet all the criteria for it being inventive. In fact, if you had to apply for a copyright trademark, if that was a logo, let's say, right? It would be inventive by all definitions. It just doesn't have an inventor. Or does it? I mean, how would you approach art that has no creator? And do you think that the art that comes out of machines or an AI in a more advanced case should also have the right to be free to create?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to take a very cheap cop out from this by saying that I don't think I would classify that as art. I don't know what I would classify it as, but I would not classify it as art. To me, art needs the artist for it to be art. Because it is, like I said, when we roll back to the beginning of this conversation, I talked about the artist's need to create his or her sort of expression of reality and truth and so on and so forth. This is not that. This is something else. I don't know how to define it, but this is something else. So I wouldn't necessarily classify it as art. But can it generate copyright? Yes. If I want to, because anything can generate copyright, right? I mean, I use a phrase and that I can copyright. So that is about law. But I don't think it necessarily qualifies as art. And I think we've had this conversation in the office also in the past, and there are different views. Different people do feel that it qualifies as art. And different people did make the case that, before paint brushes, if I painted with my fingers, you would say it's art. Once paint brushes came, you said this is not art. And to me, that's flawed because my tool has changed, but it is still me who is creating. In this case, it is not me who is creating. Now, the distinction that you might want to draw is that, but I fed in the primary data,
the prompt,
the prompt saying that sun rays, Shiva dancing on the moon, whatever. I did all of that, and then this thing created it. Fair enough. You had a thought, and your thought is not art, right? So fair, you had that thought. Credit to you, but the creation of that thought into something tangible was the process of a machine. Can you claim legal right to it and ascribe a certain value to it? Yes, but to me that does not mean that it's art.
This is wonderful, and I'm so happy in the format of this podcast because now I'm forced to take the opposite stance to whatever you just said. And I'm wondering how I can make the case that this is also art. And one thought experiment could be you're walking along the shore of a beach and you see a painting that has arrived on the shore, right? It exists, but you don't know who has created it. And you think that the background behind the lady in the painting is not that great. And so you spend an hour, let's say, repainting the background. Now you have taken something that was presumably art or not art because you don't know who the creator is. And then you've added something to it. And that end result that you hold, is that art?
Yes, you have physically added something to it. I would say that would be art. Even if that was created by a machine. The moment you added value to it, to the extent that you added your own individual expression to it, actually doing it, yes, it is art. So yeah, to that extent, I would say that it is art.
If I were to prompt a dog running on the roof of a house from an DALI type or a Mid-Journey type generator, it were to spit out an image, and I were to Photoshop the image. So I were to download it and then add something to the image by means of Photoshop. Because I'm assuming you would say that a completely blank canvas to image Photoshop is still art.
Yeah.
Right. That product is art.
I would still call it art. It's like saying that when I'm typing on my word processor, and the processor prompts a completion to the sentence, and I say, okay, that's a better way than I was thinking it. And my poem, and my fiction story, whatever, and I did it 20 times in a 1,000-word story, whatever, I would still classify it as art, because I am involved in the creation of that to the extent that it is prompting me to tell me a better, perhaps, expression. But at the end of the day, it is me creating that output. It is me editing that output. When I just give ChatGPT a prompt and say, write me a nice story about, the boy who cried wolf. And ChatGPT creates a story and gives me. And then I maybe edit 1 or 2 sentences. I would to the extent of my intervention, I think is really, really important. And that goes back to the essence of that piece. So I'm also thinking this through as we're talking about it. The essence of if the essence of what is created is human, I'm okay with it being art. But if the essence of what is being created, so like the example that you gave to me of a painting of that woman and then me changing the background, if the background was blue and I made it red, I wouldn't probably call it art, because it's still a woman with a red background. But if the essence of that painting is that woman, right? And that, again, the question then is that what do you describe as the essence of something, right?
Who decides?
Who decides? What do you describe as the essence of something? I think that to that extent, if in that case, I will decide, because I am the creator, what is the essence of this, and you can interpret it as not art. That is perfectly fine, because to me, like I said, the interpretation does not matter. But I think the essence of what is created, and you will know deep inside whether the essence is yours and whether the essence is what you wanted to communicate. If it is not, write a poem through ChatGPT. It doesn't feel like you. It may be beautiful. It doesn't feel like you, right? I can prompt ChatGPT to say, write a Shakespearean sonnet about us recording this podcast. It will create something. But the essence is not me, right? The thought was mine. The essence of what is produced is not me. And I know that. And I presume most people who are honest with themselves about their creations will know that. To that extent, I would say that it's not art. Tinkering with it does not make it art. So the essence has to matter. Now, how we define essence is obviously slightly grey.
Yeah, and especially because we're still talking about infringement. So we're saying that when can the state step in or society step in and say that this piece of art, literature, painting, whatever, is something that we don't want distributed, circulated. Maybe even to go so far as to say you can't create it. Because your original contention was art is something that I should be allowed to create in the privacy of my own space. The state and everybody else steps in when distribution is a problem, right? And the knowledge of its existence also should not be something that precludes me from being able to create it. And could they say that of an AI? And I'm thinking about, let's say deep fake as a problem, right? Where you can create deep fake images. And that to me is not a very different output than a photoshopped image. They are the same. The only difference is that one has an explicit creator. I started on a blank canvas, used an existing photograph, did some modification. The other has me inputting a prompt. And I could also push back by saying that the difference between creation and modification is probably the difference between, and in the prompt case, it's actually creation, where I'm inputting a detailed prompt to get a response. In the latter, where I were to download the image and Photoshop it, and it's only modification.
Let me twist it differently. Okay, you work in an organization. Your boss asks you to go and complete a set of tasks, and you completed those set of tasks. Who did those tasks? Did you or did your boss? He thought of you doing those tasks, but you were the one who went and completed it. So who was the person who should be rewarded for that action? Whom should that action be ascribed to? You or your boss?
In the way to sort of parallel this to art, I would say us, as in it's and this is the most idea sort of, and that's why the movie example was like this, where somebody wrote the script, somebody else shot it, somebody else acted, and then that collective group.
And each therefore gets credit for their particular action, right? But collectively, that movie is a work of art, whatever, right? But each gets collected. So each person did their little bit, right? But if in something I said, you must do X, and you went and did X and created something fantastic, it is you who created it. Because if we are going to ascribe, I mean, I work at Takshashila. Nitin gives me an idea about a book every other week. If I was to act on it, and if he was to take, if he was to say this is my creation, that would be deeply fraudulent, right? Because the idea may be his, the creation is mine. In the same way, when I'm giving a prompt to ChatGPT, the idea may be mine, but the creation of how long the dog is, who's walking on the roof, what his color is, what his expression is, that is the essence of the piece. It is, I might say, create a somber dog wearing, a hat, walking on a roof on a during a sunset, right? Or I may even make it much more detailed. The creation of that expression is where the art lies, where the dog looks somber and his eyes communicate something to you. It's not the prompt. The prompt is a thought. So to me, that's why I wouldn't consider that as art, because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, there is nothing human in that essence, because it's created by a machine.
I love it, and the way I'm looking at this in the sort of light that. On some level, I agree with you. I agree that if I were to receive a poem from somebody and they said that this poem was written by GPT, but I put in the prompt, right? I said, I tried this. I said, write a rental agreement in the form of a poem. And it gave quite a hilarious rental agreement in the form of a poem. But I agree with you that in my heart of hearts, I know I didn't create it. I didn't write it. I didn't think it through. The humor isn't mine. The prompt is mine. And the humor and the art embedded in that poem is borrowed from the millions of files it has been fed as part of its data set. Okay. But the topic we're still discussing, on the other hand, is whether this can be infringed upon. And I would contest that it's impossible to know the difference between human art and AI-created art.
I think it can be infringed upon, right? To the extent that I claim, and that's the thing, but there's a difference in my definition of art. Yes, you can create a legal claim over that particular creation through copyright or through something else. You can create a legal claim over it and license it and do so and so things. Yes, I think that is fine, and I don't think that should be a problem. That's how you create private property, and that's how you create wealth, and so I'm okay with that. The capitalist in me is completely okay with that. But would I classify that as art in my definition? No. But yes, it's a product, right? And I would say that yes, that's a product, and you can claim legal claim over that product. It's like your recipe for mango juice. Yes, please, you can claim. And your recipe for mango juice came by accident, came by machine, came however, it's fine. It makes no difference. It's your recipe for mango juice. You can take credit for it.
The challenge, though, is I think you're painting this as two distinct categories: human art and AI art. And I think it instead exists on a gradient where the level of human involvement, level of machine involvement varies. And the autocorrect tooling you referred to earlier is a good example, right? Sometimes I write an entire email and then it says, hey, this line is too long. Do you want to say this instead? And I said, yeah, that actually sounds better.
So the example that the distinction that I would make there is in terms of the amount of work done. So for me, painting, otherwise I should be painting with my fingers, and I should not even be painting. I should be using probably sand or whatever, and because paint is technology, a brush is a technology, and likewise that word processor is a technology, right? So to that extent, use of technology is not my problem. My problem is who is at the essence of that output. Who is responsible for the essence of that output? To me, it is that technology as opposed to that person. And that is where the distinction for me begins, where it does not become art.
I'm wondering if saying that without there are two levels actually. Without the creation of the AI, so the company that has built the AI tool is in large part responsible for the production of that piece. And then the person who put in the prompt is in large part responsible for the production of the piece. And if we stop thinking about AI as intelligence, and I go back to that random pixel generator thing, you would still contest that the art that is output from a random pixel generator has nothing to do with the owner. Right? That owner doesn't own the art. It is not art. It is just a random collection of pixels. And what I'm trying to push back on is that these are probably not two categories, because in the case of an AI art, there is human involvement. The human involvement is at the level of code, the human involvement is at the level of prompt. to be able to understand the prompt is something humans have coded into the tool.
Yeah.
So it is not bereft of human involvement. And hence exists on a gradient. I don't know if there are two categories.
No, I see. That is akin to saying the people who make the brushes have a contribution to the painting. I don't think that is how. Now, yes, of course, there is a different. AI is a different kind of technology, but it's akin to sort of saying that the people who created the technology have a right to claim the art, have a right to claim of contribution to the art. And I would say no. The art is a product of that artist's expression and imagination. To that extent, the prompt still has some value, but the prompt is not the essence of what has been created. When I look at that Mid-Journey created image, I'm not thinking about the prompt. I'm thinking about if it is really high quality, whatever. I'm thinking about let's assume Mid-Journey created the next Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
I'm looking at her eyes, I'm looking at her smile, and the dimensions and the contours of that are not what the prompt created. Unless the prompt said, a smile must be so and so centimeters, must be this fullness of lips, must convey this through the eyes. And to that degree that it can evoke that emotion, I don't think that it is art.
Okay, so I hear you saying something like, and that was going to be my next question, if the prompt ran into 300 pages and was an excessively detailed pixel by pixel sort of... Perhaps. But then on the counter, and in a question, if you were to place the Mona Lisa and this new piece of whatever it is, not art, adjacent to one another in a gallery and people were to walk by it, it would still evoke the same sorts of emotions in viewing it. But in your claim, it is not art simply because there is no artist.
There is no artist, yeah. To me, the artist is fundamental to the art.
And it has to be a human artist.
To me, art therefore comes within that context. The rest is technology. It is product, it is output, and it is completely legitimate. It should be used to create wealth, and I think that's perfectly fine.
Got it. This has been a very interesting way to sort of structure this. And then finally on this, back to the infringement bit. So let's say that again we were talking about art that is offensive to religious sentiments. I were to ask of M.F. Hussain to paint something, and the same ask would be made of an AI, let's say. And they were to both produce an offensive piece of art, publicly deemed offensive piece of art. Now, I know that you say something like the state should not interfere with Hussein's right to paint it.
Yeah.
Hussein's right to say it exists. Yeah. And even go so far as to have it in a gallery as long as the people going there are consenting to it.
Yeah.
Right? You can walk in, walk out. It's a private space. These are private party transactions. Yeah. Irrespective of whether it will incite violence, hurt sentiments, those things are not relevant. Would all of those be true also of the similar sort of painting created by an AI?
Absolutely. Because if somebody deems that it is of commercial value or if it is of social value and they decide to put it out there, it is their choice, because that product will still have an owner, and that owner may deem it has social value and they may put it out there in a gallery and they should have full right to. To me, that will fall under freedom of expression and freedom of speech, which is, like I said, beyond freedom of just artistic expression.
Because you cannot infringe on the right of the prompt writer to not write some prompts, or the right of the company to not code into something into the tool. All right. Which is again, it sounds to me like you are contesting the definition of art because there is no artist, but you're saying whatever this new category is that we create, right? Let's call it AI art or something else, some other new word for it. It will have all the same defensive characteristics that we are currently ascribing to art.
Yeah.
Right. So in that you are not
because it is speech. It is freedom of speech. It is freedom of expression, and that to that extent, I think it should have the same as any other aspect of speech and expression should get.
Right, and should those also, for example, if an AI were to make a movie, go through a certification board?
Yes, absolutely.
A different certification board because this is not art?
No, it should go through the same certification board. Because the nature of the product may be the same. I think in some ways the distinction that I made when I defined art early on was different from a commercial product description. It was a personal expression. Once you enter in the realm of commercial, whether it's, or distribution and commercial, it has to go through, if it's a similar kind of product, it has to go through the same kinds of checks, because you're looking at impact on society, violation of rights, and so on and so forth. And in that, yes, so you will have to have certification, you will have to have other things. And my argument again in terms of violation of rights was that, yes, the state has a role to play. And it has to be negotiated with society, but we must err far more to the liberal dimension than we are right now.
If the state were to prevent the circulation of that latter painting from an AI, whose rights would the state be violating?
The right, not necessarily of the artist, but the right of me as an individual to experience something. Why should I not be free to experience something that exists out there, that has been created? And I mean, at the end of the day, somebody is commercially gaining from it. So their right to make that speech free. So even if I did not create this art, let's remove AI completely. Let's assume that person X painted something which some others deemed offensive. Person X died. I am person Y. It was bequeathed to me. I want to put it up in a gallery. It's not my art, but it is my desire to express through that art by putting it out in a gallery. So it's not violating the artist's right, but it is violating my freedom of speech to express through that art. If I was to then apply that to AI also, that yes, it does not need to have an artist, but it is owned by somebody and it is their speech, and they would like to share that speech publicly, and they should have the right to do that. So to that extent, it should be protected.
And when you say it's owned by somebody, the somebody is the prompt writer.
The prompt writer, the company, whoever productized it, whoever decided that this is a product that I want out there in the market.
Right, and so this is still not a defense of rights of AI, right?
No.
Whatever that means.
No.
This is still a defense of free expression.
Free expression of an individual.
Right. Okay. I hear the argument that you're making. I know that before Takshashila, your career was in large part journalism, and I know that expression is fundamental to journalism. And we live in a country where we've seemed to make our peace with the fact that some degree of censure is fine. And as part of that negotiation we were talking about earlier, the state as it stands today has agreed that that line is not on the side of absolute expression. There are some scenes from some movies that we will cut out. There are some paintings we will ban, some books that we will simply not allow to publish. And the reason for this is because it will hurt sentiments to such a degree or incite violence to such a degree that either we are incapable of handling it or deem those rights superior to the right of the artist. When did you find yourself disagreeing with this?
I'm not sure, but I think that... So I grew up in a fairly liberal household. Again, Sindhi business household, but fairly liberal. And I think that it was always part of life at home that there was no restriction on thought and on speech. I think my older siblings have a role to play in this. In terms of giving you the space to... And I also grew up in a fairly liberal India. For all its warts and problems, the 1990s were fairly free. At least in terms of the India that I grew up in, right? And I can understand that in the 1990s also there were very different Indias for very different people.
Yeah.
But the India that I grew up in, Bombay, it was very liberal, it was very free, it was reasonably cosmopolitan. After I moved to Delhi as an adult, I realized that it was not as cosmopolitan as I imagined, because you've met with a very few set of communities from India. But it was free. There was no restriction on thought, and there was no restriction on ideas. So to me, it never felt like there should be any restrictions. Also, I mean, while I'm making the defense for absolute freedom in some ways, I understand the need for negotiation, for restrictions and all that. Partly because I'm quite a non-confrontational person myself, so I get it, right? Okay, there will be certain cases, whatever. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know where the impulse comes from, but I think it predominantly is a sense that you're not the fullest you until you can express yourself to as far as you want to. I think it also has to do partly with the fact that you do... I mean, as most Indian kids, as they grow up, like I said, as much as I grew up in a liberal family, there were these very base level things which are, you don't do this, you don't do that, and you pushed back against that. and every time you pushed back, you realized that you either negotiated a new space or you broke through. And at the end of it, as painful as that process was, all of us ended up better for it, because through that pain, you grew. So you felt that it's better to have that sense of freedom. So I mean, it's not a clear answer, but because I can't think of a single moment where it felt like this must be the case. But I think it's a period of time. I credit a lot of it to just 1990s Bombay, which was, again, my privilege of being in that environment. It was very, very free. It allowed you to, and wherever there were restrictions, you had the space to push back and try to break through. So I would credit it to that environment rather than anything else, where to me, and I feel this far more strongly today than maybe I felt it 15 years ago or 17 years ago, because I feel that we have regressed quite significantly. So that's where I would say that I felt it far more acutely to make this case. And then now, as a father, I feel it more acutely because I want my child to be able to explore things, make mistakes, and they grow up in, as much as things socially have regressed. It's incredible how schooling is still so thoughtful today, where my child comes and asks me interesting, really, really strange questions which I have to answer, and it makes you think. But it also tells me that he's growing up in a very different environment, and I cherish that freedom that he has to then ask these questions. And as a parent, as much as my desire is to control, I need to learn to let go. So I think that is where these impulses have become stronger and much more pronounced. But otherwise, I think I would credit it to 1990s Bombay, watching Shah Rukh Khan movies. Yes.
Got it. And as you were talking, I also thought about how frequently I've noticed how difficult it is to really and truly infringe on speech and expression. Because on one level, we will say something like, should the state, should not the state, and that dichotomy. But in terms of a sort of practical manifestation on ground, it's truly hard to do.
Yeah.
And
I think the biggest, so in Takshashila, because of public policy and all, we talk about this framework of market, society and state. To me, the state is extremely important, but we put too much emphasis on the state. Society is what matters, and these things tend to get negotiated at social levels first. As far as we can keep the state away from all of this, the better. Society must allow each other the freedom and the space to negotiate some of these things, not just around art, but also around expression. And we must err on the side of freedom. I'll give you an example. Come January, during the temple inauguration, lots of people who are of liberal orientation had tremendous discomfort around the flags that were being put up around the city. To me, as much as I understand the political moment and the import of it all, it felt like, unless I don't have any legal basis to infringe on these people's right to expression, it is fine for them to experience that joy and to express that joy. It is okay. I understand the political signaling, but that's a different battle. That's a different argument. They are free, and they should be free to experience the joy that they are experiencing at something that is a deeply held belief for them. I understand the complex history of it. I lived in Bombay through the 90s riots, so I get it. I mean, as a kid, we were pulled out of school. We saw people being hacked to death. So I know. And that did shape a lot of my thinking. I mean, my master's essay actually begins with that. My master's SOP essay began with that experience of being in Bombay. So I think that, but I think we still should respect that. Because when you don't, is when you also restrict your own space. And the only reason you're not willing to accept that is because you're discomforted by it. Yes, because of the political environment, but also because you're discomforted by this expression of what you think is unfair glory or whatever. I think we should be much more comfortable. We should be much more okay with it. That, okay, this is an expression. It's not violating anybody's rights. It's perfectly fine. And if I am somebody who believes in freedom of expression, I should believe in freedom of expression. Now, should that go on till 11 o'clock in the night for anybody? No. Again, this is 20 years ago, I perhaps would have not said this. Today I'm saying this, that at 11 o'clock in the night, it should stop. But that is where, it is, the fist starts to come very close to my nose.
Right.
It's too late in the night, I need to sleep. So my right of peaceful sleep is being violated. So I think that, but these are things that society should negotiate amongst themselves. And unfortunately, what has happened, and again, I've digressed from the art conversation, is that
please.
as a society, we have stopped understanding how to talk to each other. I see it within my RWA, and I whinge about my RWA so much on these podcasts. But we have lost the ability, because everything is about winning the argument. It is not about hearing the other side. It is not about saying, okay, fair enough. It's not about the principle. And nobody believes that you are arguing on principle when you might actually be arguing on principle, because you've become so trained that nobody is arguing on principle.
Yeah.
So we need to relearn that process of arguing on principle and learning to appreciate principle. I'll give you one last example of this.
Yeah.
Sometime back, my complex was repainted after a lot of pain. And as most things in India today now is, it was labeled as this big project. The project was given a fancy title, which was an acronym, which has become fashionable in India. It was good. They painted. I'm a tenant, so I didn't have any rights to actually make a comment about it. But they painted the entire complex. They spent a lot of money. After that paint job was completed, one fine day, 15, 20 days, a month or 2 months later, they found that somebody eating tobacco or pan had spit on one of the walls in the basement, and it had this red streak. So the committee members took a picture of it. They shared it in our group, and they said that, look, this is uncalled for. Please ask your maids and servants and drivers and whoever comes to your house to not do this. If they do it again, we will block them. They could not. There was no CCTV image of who did it.
Right.
But that was the assumption. 2 weeks later, another bit of sputum was found. Another red spot was found. And they picked that up and they shared it in the group, and they said, we had warned all of you. So henceforth, we are going to be frisking all workers who are going to enter the society, whether it be your cook, your cleaning person, your driver, your tutor. We are going to be checking all of them. And if they are found carrying cigarettes, tobacco, or anything, pan masala, whatever, those will be confiscated, and their IDs to enter the complex will be taken away, and they will be banned from entering.
Of course. Sounds like a reasonable response.
Exactly. To that, again, I'm a tenant. I have very few rights. That was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I sort of called my block representative, and I started telling him, saying, this is completely ridiculous. Firstly, do you know that for frisking you need certain facilities? Secondly, why would you only frisk a certain class of people?
Yeah.
Why would frisk everybody? It's okay. Frisk the gentleman who comes in his BMW, because you don't know who spat. It's quite likely that somebody, are you telling me that people driving in cars visiting my home don't eat tobacco? That's obviously not true. Don't chew tobacco, don't do all that. No, of course they do. So unless you can prove to me, you can't do this. And I basically said that, look, if this is the case, I will go to the cops, because this is discrimination. You will not harass people coming to my house to work. And I started the conversation very angrily, very outraged, And the gentleman actually agreed with me. He stopped me after 5 minutes of me going off and off and off on my high horse. And he stopped me and said, look, I agree with you. The principle matters. And that is when it sort of struck me, and I stopped back and said, yes, oh, you agree with me on principle. Very good. He said, let's argue with the board on principle. That this is classist. This is inequality. We can't be doing this. This is 21st century India. This is not 1920s, 1915. We're not the Brits. So let's not do this. Yeah. And then within 24 hours, that notice was not withdrawn, but it was not implemented. Because the board agreed, but the board member who issued it was an elderly gentleman who would feel quite affronted if the notice had been withdrawn. So the notice was not withdrawn. Now, if I was an absolutist, I would have probably said, no, withdraw it and apologize, because that's what you should do.
Right.
But I understand as a society, we must compromise. So my point of telling you the story is that we need to arrive at social compromises on these issues as opposed to legal conclusions. Because the moment and society must resolve some of these issues. And it is important, now if I hadn't made that call and raised a stink about it, I'm sure somebody else would have, like on many occasions other people have done. Or once they started frisking, the ladies who come to work would have come together and they would have created a mess. And within less than 24 hours, once the cooks and the cleaners did not come, the society would have been outraged. Correct. So that would have happened. But at the end, what is important is that we need to be able to talk to each other on matters of principle rather than personalizing it. Which the way I approached it initially was wrong. Outraged, personally affronted, whatever. But once I calmed down and once the gentleman told me, I agree with you, I sort of saw sense and we talked about it on a matter of principle. And we were able to arrive at a compromise which made sense. That, okay, you don't want to withdraw the notice because the gentleman is an old elderly man who will feel affronted and then there'll be a whole set of other complications. Yeah. Fair enough. We will not be implementing this and nobody will mention it. It is like it's not a legal notice. It has no legal validity even if it is there in the, So fine, let it just be. Let him not apologize. Let it just... As society, we need to arrive at some of these compromises. And I think that muscle has become very weak because we no longer talk to each other. So as uncomfortable it is, we must talk to each other. Which I said is completely different from what this conversation was. But
but which is the hope of the podcast.
Yeah.
The idea here is to do that. I mean, some of these positions make me uncomfortable because I don't hold them personally. But I'm finding myself quite surprised by how many reasonable things there seem to be on the other side when I'm forced to take, for example, the opposing position to you in this case.
Yeah.
Which then I think is the perfect lead on to the final question. And maybe we can think of a non-Indian example here as a way to do it. The Charlie Hebdo case stands out in my mind as one of these sort of offensive religious pieces of what could be considered art, a cartoon, and the response was what we know, right? The death of presumably journalists. What is the steel man here? I mean, to me it sounds like in that hierarchy of values, we place private property, the fruits of owning the fruits of my labor, individual freedom. These significantly higher than the right for you to respect my sentiments, for me to have a religious, homogeneity across the land. We've ordered them like this, and there's no clear reason to say why it can't be ordered differently, except for that, you want a more peaceful society, right? Those sort of goals. All of this is in some sort of an arbitrary domain. Yeah. What is the steel man here? If you had to step into the shoes of somebody who says that the freedom of artistic expression should be infringed upon on various grounds, what would that steel man look like?
Look, I don't think, to me, there is no reason. Look, I think there are certain things, like we discussed children and safety of children. I don't think there is even a case that, something disrupts social order and work of art and therefore it must be restricted. I don't think that there is a case for that. In the Charlie Hebdo case, it is clear that the artists have a right to produce that art. If somebody finds it offensive, they find it offensive. They can produce an piece of art in which they can express that offense. There is absolutely no reason to resort to violence. And that is completely uncalled for. It was uncalled for. So I place, and to me, I think, honestly, this is the moral arc of history. It is because I don't think the preference for individual rights and individual freedoms is arbitrary in terms of how society is structured. I think this is about lessons of history. It is fundamentally about respect for individual dignity and their individual life and existence over community rights, which can trample on the individual.
Correct.
Right? So if we are to say that each individual is endowed with certain unalienable rights, then it is my job to protect those rights, right? So therefore and as a community, when you prioritize community, you will violate individual rights. Now, in some instances, it may be required for society to function. So, for example, COVID-19, the fact that we were all locked down was because the safety of the broader community was much more important than my desire to roam around, right? And I think that is a reasonable restriction. Now, again, these are fuzzy areas of what's reasonable, what's not.
Yeah.
But my ability to express myself fully, where I'm not causing you bodily harm, I am not threatening you bodily harm. And when it was COVID-19, me wandering around could create complications for you health-wise. None of that is happening in my expression of art. It is about how you react to that art, which creates whether emotional, bodily, whatever harm to you. That is should be within your control, right? As an adult human being, it should be within your control. I don't think, therefore, there should be any restriction.
I'm still looking for the steel man here. So if you had to posit yourself in my shoes, we were doing this the other way around where you were hosting the podcast.
Okay. I would say that at certain levels, art that any product, I wouldn't even say art, I would say any product or any creation, anything that ends up... Okay, so if I was to define the steelman, I would say you would have to look at the maturity of society. Like you said, right, people of a certain constitution. You would have to look at the maturity of the society, and the state might therefore have to intervene at certain points of time. It could be about certain moments in the history of a society where, you've had riots in a city, and at that moment, something which might be problematic, which might incite violence, because tensions are high and tempers are high, whatever. Yes, okay, perhaps on distribution of that particular thing, you might have some restriction. But that cannot be perpetual, right? It is a momentary thing. Once it is deemed okay, yes. In that, the state has to make certain distinctions. So yes, at certain moments, I can see why, and I might be able to make that concession that yes, in the interest of the safety and security bodily of society, the right to life of people being infringed upon, I am likely to make that case. That yes, so right to life, infringement on right to life perhaps is a case. Infringement on right to property is perhaps a case. But beyond that, not really.
Got it. Manoj, thank you so very much for coming on the podcast. And I want to thank you particularly because in having to speak with you, I had to do so much reading on the Now I know so much about art that I didn't know before I started off. So I'm grateful for that as well. This should go out publicly, I hope. So thank you very much. And for people listening, if you have any feedback about the format, about what we've said through this conversation, if you think we should have done things differently, you have something to say to Manoj or to me, please leave it in the comments or write to us and we'll be happy to write.
Yeah, if you're lawyers, philosophers, please, I'm not a lawyer, not a philosopher, please feel free to write back to me and tell me how I'm completely wrong as per legal definition. I'll happily learn much more from
both
it.
Of us, yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Manoj.